Parliament Hill. Stella Ambler is a Conservative MP who hails from Mississauga. Jinny Sims is an NDP MP from North Delta, BC. Yvonne Jones, Liberal MP who comes all the way from Labrador. Welcome to you all. I haven't seen you for a long time.
Thank you, Don.
Look, this Nadom thing is getting kind of silly. I mean, in some ways, I don't know how hard it can be to give someone the most coveted judicial prize in Canada. I think we spent $80,000 getting legal advice, another $150,000 on translation and other services. Jinny, you made a statement about the other day. Your head must shake. How does this thing, is it over now? Stephen Harper said he's going to abide by the spirit and the law of the decision, or is there still more to come?
I heard a bit of both, like we haven't decided and then saying we will abide by the decision. Well, we have our court system and it's separate from the political arm for a reason. And the judiciary has spoken that what the Prime Minister did was he stepped outside and violated a constitutional right. And now that the ruling is there, let's move on.
Okay. I'll get to your thoughts on this, Yvonne, before we go to the inevitable reaction from Stella.
Well, I think the decision of the Prime Minister to try to appoint him in the first place is just proved to be a complete waste of time, a complete waste of money, and it's left people of Quebec still without the kind of judiciary leadership that they need within the province. So, you know, I think right from the beginning he made the wrong decision, and he should have followed the rules of practice that was there.
It does seem to be that he just didn't. I mean, I know what he did. He consulted, and then he acted to a point. And it looked like he was getting green lights right down the row, but, you know, really, it's quite a mess, isn't it?
Well, I think that's why we were all surprised, because we consulted with experts, and the decision seemed to be, or the advice seemed to be that this would be acceptable. But let me point out, too, Don, that it was an all-party committee that took a look at this, and that neither the NDP nor the Liberals, and in fact no one on the committee, but including NDP and Liberals, they did not object to this. There were no objections to the appointment. Having said that, you know, our objective is to provide a full complement of judges, of Supreme Court justices, so, and that includes filling the vacancy in Quebec. So.
Yep. Get on her. All right, let's
Yep.
move along. Jean-Pierre Kingsley, respected man on elections law. He initially gave this bill a very good mark, the Fair Elections Act. He didn't change his grade. We're going to ask him later if he would, but he didn't change his grade, but he certainly had some criticisms of it. I'm asking you, Stella Ambler, isn't it time to give this thing a rethink now? There seems to be criticism coming at this nationally, internationally, from people who initially thought it was a good bill, now have doubts.
I think he expressed some concerns, no doubt, but I also believe, and I've been talking to constituents a lot about this, and there is some concern out there, but when you put it to the average Canadian, when you explain that it, you know, when you say, don't you think it's reasonable to present ID? And we're talking about the vouching, which seems to be kind of the #1 concern. But when you're talking about going to a polling station and not having to prove that you are who you are or that you live in that riding, most people say, yeah, I guess it is reasonable. And, you know, and then when you say that there are 39 pieces of identification that can be used, you realize that most people have one of those things or two, and so you don't. I mean, the minister today was saying, you know, pointed out in question period that you don't even need photo identification. The requirements are not that onerous.
Yeah, Jenny, I want to get to you on that, though, because it does seem to make sense that you should have some idea. It's a phone bill or a hydro bill or something that says, hey, I live at this address, that's my name. What's so hard about finding some ID like that? Why do you have to have someone come along and say, I'm vouching for them, you can vote?
You know, first of all, both the current Chief Electoral Officer and the longest serving electoral officer have both said that vouching has not been a problem. But what it did was it allowed some of our most vulnerable community members to vote where they may not have done. And you know, when somebody vouches for somebody, that's a very serious act. They actually have to sign and do all of those things. Mm-hmm. But to say that the issues raised by Kingsley in the meeting today were just his minor concerns, he actually said something that was very profound. It will undermine our democracy, right? Undermine access to voting for many people. And the other issue he raised, which is one that we should pay attention to, why would we take away from the Chief Electoral Officer the right they had to promote voting, especially with the young people? Surely we want to engage them. If they get practiced into voting early, they will remain voters. And what we've done is we've muzzled the Chief Electoral Officer, and they can no longer, they were not engaged in partisan activities. It was to encourage young people and citizens to engage in the act of voting. And that is a good thing. So why are we taking that away?
Yvonne Jones?
Well, I think instead of it being the Fair Elections Act, it's probably the more Unfair Elections Act, and that's the reviews that we've been hearing both across the country and internationally. But more so than that, I think that the issue that the Conservatives are trying to get to here is not one of increasing democracy and promoting democracy. You know, we should be encouraging people to go out and vote, not providing barriers for them at the ballot box. And I represent an area where I have a huge Aboriginal population. I have colleagues who represent huge immigrant populations. In lots of cases, you know, vouching is one of the ways which allows them to be able to vote, especially when they're new or in an area where they don't have access to a lot of the ID services that you have elsewhere in Canada. Okay. So, you know, from that perspective, we don't think it's going to encourage more people to get involved in elections. I think it's going to do the very opposite. And in addition to that, the other provisions that is being promoted in this bill will, in my mind, allow the Conservative government to cover up some of the activities that we've seen in the past that have been going on with regard to elections in this country.
All right, quick last topic. We got a clip from Question Period talking about iPolitics did an analysis of the use of the government's planes to get to fundraisers. Let's hear what happened in the House of Commons earlier today.
The Prime Minister has stuck taxpayers with the bill for nearly $120,000 in flights on the government's jet by their party's bagmen. Why is the Prime Minister's plane being used as a perk to reward Conservative Party bagmen?
The RCMP are in charge of the Prime Minister's security. They, of course, recommend that the Prime Minister does not fly a commercial, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, when the Prime Minister travels on Conservative Party business, those costs are reimbursed to the taxpayer, Mr. Speaker. That's a policy that this Prime Minister brought into place, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of the fact that this government has, of course, reduced the use of challengers by some 75% in comparison to the previous Liberal government. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition might want to explain why he's charging taxpayers for offices across this country where he has no members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker.
All right, Stella Amber, I got to get your thoughts on this quickly. I mean, it seems to me you're carrying fundraisers around the country on government planes. That doesn't sound quite like it's appropriate use of government aircraft.
Well, it's also absolutely untrue. The Prime Minister repays the cost of personal travel and party travel every single time he travels.
Looks like you got a bargain airfare.
Well, he repays the cost of the equivalent commercial flight, which is the right thing to do, and it's what he's been doing since day one in 2006. Unlike the Liberals, we spend 75% less on Challenger flights, on Prime Minister's travel, on ministers. The Liberals, for example, used it as a personal taxi service.
That's so 13 or 10 years ago, though.
No, well, but I'm just saying 75%, and I bet it wasn't all that difficult because the Liberals used to just use it. Ministers used it to go to their own ridings for and there was no repayment of the personal costs. So we don't do any of that. And the reason
you're
why
just as bad as they are.
No, we're 75% better.
Yeah. I think that's
we're saving a ton of money. The NDP, on the other hand, is using taxpayer-funded funds.
I've never even seen the inside of a government.
Yeah, you're right.
Let's stick to this topic.
So they're opening party offices in places where they don't have MPs.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So first of all, let's say that Harper and his government got elected on the promise of transparency and more accountability. And here we have, and we've had my dear colleague sitting next to me say, and the Prime Minister compensates at the commercial rate. Well, I can tell you over the Christmas season, you're not going to find a ticket from Calgary over to Ottawa for $262. That would have to be pretty miraculous. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, and I will say that we have to really take a look at what this government said they would do and what they are actually doing when they're in power. And saying they did it and we don't do it as badly as they don't does not cut it.
Okay, Yvonne Johns, I want to get a last word from you.
Well, like you, I've never been on a government jet, so I'll get that cleared up. But let me just say, I understand the practice of the Prime Minister having to use non-commercial flights. There's no argument with that. What I have trouble with is when you start letting that extend to people who are conservative beg people raising money for the Conservative Party, and they're traveling on the dime of taxpayers. That's not right, and it's not acceptable.
We're out of time.
So I think it definitely has to stop, but I don't think the repayment is adequate either.
All right. Thank you all. See you next week. Thanks for coming in. Okay, Prime Minister.